Welcome. So what we're going to go over here today is how to add an options menu to your projects. And specifically, we're going to do this with the Droid Cafe project. So what I'm going to do before I get started, I'm going to go into my repo. I'm going to go into 4.2. I'm going to grab Droid Cafe. I'm going to copy that over to 4.3. So once that finishes copying, we'll go into Android Studio. I'll open up that folder. Once the project loads up, what I want to do is create a menu resource. So I'm going to go over to my resource folder here, and you'll notice that there's a few things already there, right? So we've got drawable, we've got layout, we've got map and values. But what I actually need is a folder named menu, which is where I'm going to put all my menu resources. Now to create that, I need to create that directory first so I can put the resources inside of it. So I'm going to right click Res here. I'm going to say new, and we're going to say new Android resource directory. So that's specifically what you want to click there. First, Android resource directory. Now you may notice in the dropdown that there is also an option here called directory. These are very similar but don't do the exact same thing. So do make sure when you go in here, when you're creating this menu folder, pick Android resource directory, not directory. Again, slight differences between how those operate. Okay, so if you've picked new resource directory, you're going to see a screen like this. If you just pick directory, you're just going to see a screen that says just pick the name. But here we're going to say I want to pick what kind of resource is going to go in there. So from the second dropdown, not going into the directory name, going into resource type, I'm going to say let's pick menu, and that will automatically change the directory name to menu. So that's all I've got to do is pick menu from the resource type dropdown and hit OK. All right, so now we have a new folder called menu, and that's going to be where we're going to put all of our menu resources. So I'm going to right click here, and I'm going to say new. I'm going to create a new menu resource file. So the name of this file typically start it with the name menu and then the name of the screen that it goes with. So in this case, I'm going to create a menu for the main screen. So I'm going to call it menu, or the main activity. So I'm going to call it menu main. All right, so I'm going to type that in as the file name, or go ahead and hit OK. That will put it into this menu resource file. I'll get a designer kind of like this, but you'll notice that my designer is a little bit different. I still have a design view, I still have a palette, I still have a component tree, but rather than being able to put controls in kind of like we did with our layouts, we're limited to a very small number of things that we can actually add to a menu. And realistically, one we're going to do is menu items. So those are individual things that basically function as buttons that you can click on. So we're going to add 4 things to our menu. I'm just going to kind of drag in some items here into the component tree. So I've got 4 items in my menu. So first thing I want to do is change their title. And so the first menu item is going to be order. Enter on that to save it. Second item is going to be status. The third item is going to be favorites. And the fourth item is going to be contact. All right, so we've got a menu with 4 items in it. Great. I still will need to extract the strings, just like I do with other resource files. We'll come back here and do that in a moment. But before I get too much further, one of the things I want to do is give each of these, or give some of these here, an icon. Okay, so if I kind of think through, what might make sense as a sensible icon, I think for the order, I'm going to give that a shopping cart icon. So I need to create that here. So I'm going to go into drawable, and I'm going to say, well, let's add that and a vector asset, although I actually already have that. So I'm going to use the IC cart that we added in a previous lecture. So I'm going to go over, I've got order selected. I'm going to pick the icon, and I'm going to go to my IC cart. So I'm going to use the cart icon for that. For my status, I will I symbol, information symbol. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new icon for that. So vector drawable, vector asset. So we're going to create a new vector asset. The one I want, I think, look for info. So info is the one I'm going to add. I'm going to call this IC info. As we did this previously, I'm going to do this as white. So I'm going to hit next on that and then hit finish. So I have IC info, and then I'm also going to add one for favorites. So I'm going to add a new vector asset here. Look for the heart. There we go, favorite. Hit OK. So this is going to be IC favorite. I'm going to hit next on that. Let's also add one for contact. So new vector asset, and I want like an envelope. Maybe it's under mail. Okay, there we go. So I'm going to do mail and use that as my contact. And so I'm going to call this IC mail. Okay, finish. So now I can go through each of these different menu items and assign them those different icons that we just created. So order we've set. Status is going to be the I for info. Favorites is going to be the heart. And contact is going to be that little envelope. Okay, so I've given each of those an icon. The next thing I want to do is I want some of these menu items to actually appear up here in what we call the action bar. And so that's for kind of commonly used items. The two I'm going to bring up is going to be, first of all, order. So I'm going to bring that one up here, show as action. And I'm going to say, well, I always want to see that one. So I'm going to hit apply. So that's going to bring it up here and show it as an icon on the bar instead of in this dropdown. And I can do the same thing with status. So status, we're going to bring that up as an action. So show as an action always. So default, if you don't set something, is never, so it never appears up there. You can also set these additionally if you want them to appear if there's space. I could set these as if room. And so that would say if there's enough room to show it, then bring it up here. If there's not enough room, then leave it in what we call the overflow menu. But I'm going to go back to never with that one by not selecting anything. So these two items will appear here in the overflow. These two will appear up here as action buttons, so you can get to them quickly. All right. So that's the part that I need to set up in terms of the menu resource. The next thing I want to do is kind of hook that up. Now, if I run the app as is, if I run it with just this menu resource created, I won't actually see that menu yet because I haven't hooked it up anywhere, right? So I've got a menu resource, but there's no connection to it anywhere in the app. So it won't actually appear. So the first thing I need to do is I need to tell it to actually be visible here on the main activity. Now, the way to do that is I need to go into the Java code. I need to go to the actual activity class. So I'm going to go to main activity because I want this menu to appear on the main activity. And we need to override a few methods. So the first one I want to override, I'm going to do this under onCreate. I'm going to say on create options menu. Okay, so this gets called as the app kind of starts up. As the app is created, and this gets called to kind of figure out if you have a menu, we want to inflate it and make it visible. So in terms of what I need to implement here, what I want to call first is get menu inflator. So that will give me the class that I need to actually inflate or turn the menu resource into actual UI controls. So I want to say get menu inflator and then inflate. We then need to give it the ID of our menu resource. So that will be r.menu, kind of like we had r.string for string resources, r.menu, menu main. The next argument is the menu that is passed in here as the argument to that function. So that will say, okay, go take that menu and build it out using the stuff that's in this resource. And then finally, I need to say return true. Return true says, yes, there is a menu, and I've already inflated it. Go ahead and just show it. So just putting those 2 lines of code in there into onCreateOptions menu, I will now be able to see my menu. And so I can click in here. I see I have the shopping cart. I've got my info for my status. I can click in here and get that overflow, favorites and contact. Great. So that's the basic setup you've got to do to actually get a menu on screen. The next question is how do I actually get that menu? How do I get those menu items to do anything? Because you'll notice right now I can click on any of these buttons, but nothing happens. Okay. So we saw that we had to implement onCreateOptions menu to get the menu to appear initially. To actually handle when an option is picked, when an item is picked, I need to implement another method. So the other method I need to implement is OptionItem Selected. Okay, and here's where I'm going to put all the code that responds to when an item is clicked. Now you'll notice it will pre-populate it, calling the base class super OptionItem Selected. We want to keep that. We're going to inject our own code for the cases that we want. So first thing I want to do is put in a switch statement, and I'm going to switch based on the item that's selected. And specifically, I'm going to switch on the ID of the item is selected. So we're going to say item.getItemID. Okay. And so then my different cases here will be if they select this item, then do this. If they select this item, and then do something else. So for instance, let's say we want to pick the first one. And so I'm going to say case r.id. I need to go back. I have not given these menu items any IDs, I don't believe. Right. Okay. I gave them titles, but I actually never gave them IDs. So I do need to go through each of these items and give them ID so I can refer to them later. So this would be item or action, commonly is what we start that with. So this would be action order is the ID of that menu item. This is action status. Action favorites. And this is action content. Okay, so I've given those an ID. And I can come back and hit my code to that. So case r.id.action order. So if they click the order item, then I want to run some code. And so easy thing to do to test that code and make sure it works is just put in a toast. So I'm going to say, let's make a toast and say the word order when you click on the order item. So here I'm going to put in, well, we want the context. It's going to be this. The message I want it to show is order. And the duration is going to be toast dot length short dot show. All right. And then finally in here, I'm going to say return true to say, yes, we've done something with that. So basically, I'm going to fill that in for each of the different cases. So I'm going to say, okay, for if you click order, we're going to do that. If you click on status, then we're going to say, show the toast status and return true. If you click on favorites, then we're going to put in here favorites and show the text favorites. And then finally in here, if you click on contact, then we're going to show the toast contact. And then finally, if it's anything else, then I'm going to say default. The default is return the parent implementation. Once I've got all that code in, I can run the app. And so if I click on the shopping cart icon, I should see it display order. If I click on the information icon, I can see status, favorites, and contact. So great, those all work. So that's how I can fill that in there. Now you may remember in previous lectures that I've mentioned one of the ways that you deal with getting the up navigation and the back navigation to work the same way is actually that you override this method as well on OptionItem Selected, because basically this method is called for anything up here in the app bar, including the up navigation button. So if I want to include that fix, I just need to add another case. And so this would be android.r.home. Remember, that's a built-in ID, not an ID that we've created. And basically here I would say on back pressed, return true. So that would be how I would go about getting this also to work with, say, the up navigation, ID, r.id.home, if I needed to get this working the same way with the up navigation as back navigation as well. That's the bit of code that I would add in there. Just one more case. So that's kind of a start. The next thing I would like to do is make at least one of these items actually kind of do something. So a common thing that we might do from these items is take the user to another screen. It doesn't have to be used that. As you see with toasts, this can really be used for anything. You can use the menu to do anything you want, but commonly we use it to send the user to other screens or give them a way to navigate around the app. So in here, I would say, let's make the order one take them to the order screen. So in here, I'm going to remove the toast code that we'd written previously. Let's construct an intent. And we're going to say intent is equal to new intent. And this would be that. All right, so this is going to be the context, this, and we're going to send it to order activity. So I'm going to say order activity dot class. And then the next step would be to actually say start activity. So start activity intent. So with that in place, it should, instead of showing a toast, that shopping cart icon should actually take us to the order screen. And we crashed. What did I screw up? Let me look into Logcat. And if I look into Logcat, I can kind of filter it down to error, figure out what's going on here. And as it turns out, you'll see that there's an error message, null pointer exception, attempt to get length of null array over on order activity. So let's go to order activity line 98. So what's happened is over on order activity, we've assumed that some data actually is being passed over when I create that order activity. Namely, we want it to show the things that we want to show it the things that you have picked or added to your cart. And I'm not sending that data. So when I come back in here, well, items is null. So that's resulting in a crash because we haven't really checked for that. So one thing I probably want to do just to beef up my code is I probably don't want this to crash if the items are there. So I'm going to add in a quick check. If items is not null, then we're going to proceed with loading the items into the result field, the order text. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and just put that in a quick if statement. And that should keep it from crashing, but we'll notice over here that I still won't have items. So for instance, if I add froyo and ice cream sandwich, I go to the next screen, it shows up that way, but it doesn't show up if I click the icon in the menu, right? So that's something we need to fix. All right, so I'm going to go back to main activity, And in main activity, basically the problem is I didn't add that extra. Now, if I look into where we handle that button already, here it's on order. You can kind of see I loop through the array, build up this, loop through the list and build up this array, and then finally I call put extra, etc., start activity. So basically the code I'm missing is that and that. Now, I could duplicate that code. I could say, well, let's take all this code here and put it into that statement. Well, that would work, but there'd be a lot of code duplication there. So what I might want to do instead is actually just call that function. So rather than writing our own code here, making a copy of the code, I would just say, let's call onOrder. So onOrder, and we'll pass in, we could say, well, maybe I want to pass in the item. Well, as it turns out, the menu items, the things that appear at the top, both these buttons as well as the overflow menu items, these are actually technically not views, which is kind of an interesting thing because you think that, well, most of the time, everything that I pass through is going to be a view, but these UI components are actually not views. Now, what I can do is I could just say pass null here. And if I look at on order in this case, we'll notice I'm actually not using the view that you clicked on anywhere there. So that's actually acceptable. And so that's what I'm going to do here. I'm just going to pass in null to the on order method because I don't actually care how we got there. All right, so let's come in here. And so I'm going to say if I click on the ice cream sandwich, the froyo, if I go then look in my cart, great, problem solved. So that's oftentimes how things will end up. Oftentimes, you can put a lot of logic into this big switch statement. That tends to grow over time and become much more complicated. So oftentimes I will spin off the additional items here off into a separate function that you can then call. All right, so that's all I think I needed to do for today, was just show you how to implement those icons that menu up at the top, and we'll see you tomorrow with the video on how to work with dialog boxes.